You've probably heard of Patrick Radden Keefe's book, Say Nothing. I mean, at this point, it's not just a book, it's a full-on cultural landmark. It takes this incredibly deep, haunting look at the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and it has absolutely captivated readers and critics all over the world.
And we're not just talking popular here. This thing was a critical darling. It scooped up the National Book Critics Circle Award, it parked itself on the New York Times bestseller list for 6 weeks, and some people have hailed it as one of the best books of the 21st century. It's even been adapted into a major TV series. We are talking about a modern classic, no question.
And the praise from other writers? Just as glowing. David Gran, who is a master of this genre himself, called it meticulously reported and grippingly told. Say Nothing really just solidified Keefe's reputation as a top-tier, A-list storyteller.
But what if that's not the whole picture? What if a key source alleges the book is actually full with inaccuracies? And what if the author himself left out a crucial detail from his own background, a detail that could cast the entire project in a very different light?
Okay, so to really get what this controversy is all about, we have to first understand the story at the very heart of Say Nothing.
The book centers on the incredibly tragic case of Jean McConville. This all happens during the Troubles, a brutal, decades-long conflict in Northern Ireland over its very identity. And in 1972, right at the peak of the violence, McConville was abducted from her home, in front of her children, and just vanished. Her disappearance became one of the most notorious events of the entire conflict.
When you see an image like this, the ambush at Burntallet Bridge in 1969, you start to feel the raw, brutal reality of the world that Say Nothing explores. This was a time of intense and deeply, deeply personal violence.
And the story itself is set in places like the Divis Flats in West Belfast, which is where Jean McConville lived with her 10 kids. This sprawling housing complex was a real flashpoint in the conflict, a place where secrets were buried under a very heavy code of silence.
Now, that silence was eventually shattered by an oral history archive, a key source for Keefe's book. But in a pretty strange twist, the man who helped create that very archive has become the book's most outspoken critic.
And that brings us to Ed Moloney. He's a seasoned Irish journalist and a co-creator of the Boston College Archive. This archive housed secret, explosive interviews with former paramilitary members. Now, Moloney didn't just provide Keefe with access, he gave him the unredacted interviews that really became the backbone of Say Nothing. So he's not just a source, he is a key player in this entire saga.
So, Moloney has laid out his case in a detailed counter-narrative, pointing to what he calls major omissions, factual errors, and a flawed methodology. Let's dig into his key arguments.
Okay, take a quick look at this timeline of Keefe's career. From 2009 to 2011, you can see he was a policy advisor at the Pentagon. But here's the thing. You will not find that in the author bio of Say Nothing. It's completely left out.
For Moloney, this is a major ethical breach. I mean, think about it. Many of Keefe's sources were ex-IRM members who had spent their lives fighting against state security forces. So would they have opened up to a journalist who had recently worked for the Pentagon, a key ally of the British government? Moloney's answer is a firm no, and he argues they had a right to know who they were really talking to.
Moloney also highlights what he claims are just basic factual mistakes. For instance, Keefe writes that after a late-night meeting with IRA leaders, Moloney slept on the floor. Moloney's response? "I retired to my bed, which I was not going to give up for anyone." Now, this might seem like a small point, but Moloney uses it to cast doubt on the book's overall reliability.
And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. Moloney challenges Keefe's account of how the Boston College Archive came to be, the motivations behind key interviews, and a whole host of other crucial details. He argues it all points to a pattern of misrepresentation.
At the very heart of the McConville case is the IRA's justification for her murder, their claim that she was a spy for the British Army. And the key piece of evidence they offered was a small Stornophone radio, which they allegedly found in her apartment. In Say Nothing, Keefe presents this as a bit of a he said, she said, weighing the IRA's claim against a police officer's denial. But Moloney says he actually gave Keefe proof from the official Bloody Sunday inquiry and a soldier's own memoir that Stornophones were indeed used by the British Army in that area at that time. So the accusation is that Keefe deliberately ignored evidence that would have bolstered the IRA's story.
And all of this feeds into a larger critique of Keefe's whole methodology. You know, in most nonfiction books, you'll see a little number after a sentence. That's a citation, usually in a format like Chicago style, and it tells you exactly where that piece of information came from.
Well, Say Nothing doesn't do that. There are no numbers in the text.
To find a source, you have to go digging through pages of notes at the back of the book. Moloney quotes an industry insider who says this is a common tactic to create a more commercial narrative. In other words, to make the book read more like a novel than a work of history.
The result, according to Moloney, is that the average reader has no idea what's Keefe's original reporting and what's been painstakingly gathered by other journalists over the years, including Moloney. It creates a really smooth narrative for sure, but one that Moloney argues blurs the lines of attribution and obscures the true source of the information.
You know, this is so much more than just a feud between two authors. It gets at the very heart of how we write about history, especially a history as raw and contested as the Troubles.
And ironically, Keefe's own choice of epigraph for the book sums up the issue perfectly. It's a quote from writer Viet Thanh Nguyen. "All wars are fought twice, the first time on the battlefield, the second time in memory." This whole debate is a skirmish in that second war, the war for the memory of the Troubles.
So we're left with a really difficult question. Say Nothing is a masterpiece of storytelling. But Moloney's critique makes us wonder, when we turn history into a gripping narrative, what gets lost in translation? What details are smoothed over? What inconvenient truths are left on the cutting room floor? And in the end, who gets to decide which version of the story becomes history?